Our speaker today really does not need any introduction. Everybody knows him, loves to hear him. So, in the words of our speaker, here's Johnny.
Thanks, Bill. Y'all feel free to interrupt me with scores from the ball game. I think that's about 15 minutes ago. I do want to recognize one person. That's a colleague of ours from the legislature. I think there's D. Richard. When I give speeches away from Baton Rouge, I always tell folks, look, Louisianians believe in justice, but every now and then we send an innocent man to the legislature. And D. Richard is one of those innocent, good people, in my opinion. I want to thank him for his service. I want to talk a little bit today, close that door for me, Chris. I want to talk a little bit today about the budget for Louisiana state government from 30,000 feet. And I want to put it in perspective first. In 2004, actually, let's call it fiscal year 2005. I picked that year because it was the last budget, other really than the current budget, that Louisiana didn't have any one-time federal funds to help us rebuild after the storms. In fiscal year 2005, the budget for our state was $16.5 billion. The general fund was about $6.5 billion. Today, 10 years later, our budget is $25 billion. And I'm talking about this year and in all probability next year. That's about $8.5 billion for the general fund, but that's not all the state money in the budget. We've got about $4.35 billion in statutory dedications, monies that are dedicated. We also have about $2.5 billion in self-generated fees. Some folks think that most of our budget is comprised of federal money. That's not accurate. This year and next year, we'll receive about $10 billion of federal money out of a $25 billion budget. That's about 40%. My point, though, is that over the last 10-year period, we've gone from a $16.5 billion budget to a $25 billion budget, excluding all the hurricane money, which you have to do because it skews the numbers. That's a 52% increase over a 10-year period. That's a 52% increase over a period of time when we haven't added people. Actually, we've lost a congressional seat. And inflation has been well under 2%. Current inflation rates are well under 1.5%, some think under 1%. The truth of the matter is that putting aside the one-time hurricane money for which the state of Louisiana was just a conduit, we have more money today at $25 billion adjusted for population and adjusted for inflation than we have ever had since Louisiana became a state in 1812. And that's just... So how come we're broke? I mean, how come we have a 1.6 billion, well, it's actually, with the newly discovered shortage in health care, $1.8 billion budget deficit, $1 billion of which is structural. How come policymakers have had to spend all $800 million in the Medicaid trust fund for the elderly? We started a few years ago with $800 million in that trust fund. We've now got zero. How come policymakers have had to take $400 million from the savings account we had set aside to pay retirees' health insurance claims? How come policymakers have decided to have a tax amnesty program just about every Thursday? How come policymakers have had to sell assets every year, take that non-recurring money and use it not to pay down debt, but to pay debt service. They're about to do it again for next year, which just pushes the problem down the road. How come? If we've gone from a $16.5 billion budget in 2005 to a $25 billion budget today, how come in 2008, when the current administration took office, we had a $900 million surplus, and today we've got a $1.8 billion deficit? How come? Well, I want to give you one person's point of view about why we have that problem here today. And the short answer is simply this. It's how we're spending the money that we do have. I don't think any reasonable person looking at the numbers can argue that we don't have enough money. Yes, we've had more money before. At one time, our budget got as high as $28 billion. But we were a conduit for federal monies which flowed through state government to help our people rebuild. It's not fair to count that one-time federal money. If you take out the hurricane money and compare apples to apples, let me say it again, we've got more money today than we've ever had. I think our problem, in my judgment, is how we're spending the money. And the problem for the last 7 years has been we've spent more money than we took in every single year. The budget has been balanced on paper, but it hasn't been truly balanced. Now, why is that? Let me drill down a little bit further and give you one person's point of view of why our spending practices need to be reformed. Here, to me, I think is the problem. It's twofold. We spend entirely too much money on undeserving people at the top who get bailouts and special treatment. And we spend entirely too much money on too many undeserving people at the bottom who get handouts. When I say undeserving, I don't mean these are bad people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying undeserving, not in the pejorative sense, but in the sense that the money we're spending on the people at the top giving bailouts and the people at the bottom getting handouts would be better spent for them and for the greater good on other areas. Let me give you some examples. Let's start with statutory dedications. We've got, this year we budgeted $4.35 billion in statutory dedications. That's money that doesn't have to compete with higher education or health care or anybody else. They just get their money automatically. We've got around 370 special funds set up in the state treasury by the legislature. Set up with a majority vote, by the way. They can be unset up with the majority vote. And there's a myth that most of our money is dedicated in the Constitution. That's not true. That's not accurate. Some of it is. We have a Louisiana Educational Quality Trust Fund. Money's dedicated there. We have a tobacco settlement trust fund called the Millennium Fund. Some of that money is dedicated. But the vast majority of our money, $4.35 billion, is dedicated by statute. And when you look at some of the funds to which we have dedicated money, I mean, here's the list. I'll just read you a couple. The Audubon Golf Trail Development Fund, the Louisiana Economic Development Fund, the Entertainment Promotion and Marketing Fund, another marketing fund, the Beautification Project for New Orleans Neighborhoods, the Vital Records Conversion Fund, the Insurance Fraud Investigation Fund, the Louisiana Auto Theft and Insurance Fraud Prevention Fund, let's see, the Right to Know Fund, the Fraud Detection Fund, the Cameron Parish Tourism Development Fund, the Town of Homer Economic Development Fund, the DeSoto Parish Visitor Enterprise Fund, I'm not going to read all of them, but those are illustrative. I'm not saying that all of this money should be undedicated. I'm not saying that. Some of these dedications are dedications of self-generated revenue. A good example is the Boll Weevil Ratification Fund. Our farmers have gotten together, they tax themselves, they give the money to the state in return for a service. I wouldn't undedicate those funds. But not all those funds are like that. And it seems to me that if we're trying to figure out a way how to deliver vital services to the people of Louisiana, we have to start with looking at this $4.35 billion worth of statutory dedications. And what we need to do, what the legislature needs to do, it's going to require a little work. But it has the staff through the Legislative Auditor's Office, and it has the staff through the Legislative Fiscal Office to go through each one of those dedications one by one and measure the cost versus the benefit. Why have we made the dedication? Is it a vital product or service that the people of Louisiana need and deserve? Should that particular purpose have to compete with roads and universities and health care for the money? I mean, we talk all day long about the general fund, and it's important. But the truth of the matter is that the statutory dedications are half as big as the general fund. And they're sitting there fully dedicated. We're not going to get control of the spending problem of Louisiana until we face some of our dedications. Let me give you another example. Staffing. There's been a lot of discussion about the number of state employees, and we have reduced our state employees. I remember I stood here about 6 years ago and said we can reduce, we're number one in the South in the number of state and local employees per 10,000 people. We need to reduce that number by not filling vacancies. Paul Rainwater, my good friend, was commissioned then, was sent out to explain that if we do that, we'll have to shut down the prisons and unplug the dialysis machines and all this stuff. Well, they did, and we have reduced the number of state employees substantially. We didn't have to close any prisons and unplug the dialysis machines, and I want to give Governor General credit for that. But one thing he has not looked at is our staffing levels. The legislative auditor did a report a few years ago, found that 22% of all the managers in the classified service manage one employee. He found that the average span of control, the average manager in the classified service manages 4 employees. You would never see businesses in the real world staffed at those levels. What we need to do is do what was recommended in 1995. Some of you remember it. Some of you remember the SELECT report. SELECT stood for Select Council on Revenues and Expenditures in Louisiana's Future. The people on that select committee back in 1995 were folks like John Alario, Mark Drennan, Lee Griffin. These were some of the smartest people in state government who got together, and one of their recommendations was to move to a span of control of 1 employee, or rather 1 manager for 10 employees. The select group said we need to reduce all the layers of management in the departments of government to no more than 5. We ought to limit clerical personnel to 15% of the workforce. That's especially true today with technology. We've done none of that, folks. And the fact of the matter is that the numbers demonstrate we've got way too many generals and not nearly enough foot soldiers. We're not going to be able to right-size this budget until we address that expenditure, because labor is always the largest cost for any institution. I want to give you a couple more examples. And I'm not going to belabor this because I've talked to you about it before. Contracts. The legislative auditor, I didn't know he was going to do it, but Monday, a week ago, he issued a report on consulting contracts. He found that we have 14,000 consulting contracts. He also found that we have 4,600 consulting contracts worth $250 million that are off the books. If you go over to the Office of Contractual Review and say, let me see the contracts, they're not going to show you 4,600 of them. You can't manage what you can't measure. You've heard me talk about these contracts before. We've got two bills in the legislature to try to address that problem. House Bill 30 by Representative Richard, House Bill 376 by Lance Harris. We've got consulting contracts. I kid you not, I'll show you later the numbers and the actual contracts. We've got consulting contracts with the University of Tennessee, the University of Georgia, Texas Tech University, Texas A&M University, University of Arkansas, Rutgers State University, Oregon State University, Vanderbilt University, Duke University, University of Southern Mississippi, at a time when our universities are being fiscally waterboarded. There's something wrong with this picture. Now, the administration came in front of our committee when we were hearing House Bill 30 the other day and said we only have about 150. Let me read you from the fiscal note from last year's equivalent of House Bill 30. This is from the Legislative Fiscal Office. In the fiscal year 2013 alone, just 1 year, the Office of Contractor Review annual report states that OCR approved a total of 2,001 professional, personal, and consulting services contracts with a total contract value of approximately $3.1 billion. That's just 1 year. If you check this budget, you will find that next year we're going to spend $47 million alone on consultants for coastal restoration. I am all for coastal restoration. But these consultants are not going to plant a blade of swamp grass. They're just going to study a problem that we know we already have. That $47 million, check my numbers if you don't believe me. That $47 million that we will spend on those out-of-state consultants to tell us we have a problem is more money than the entire general fund contribution next year to LSU in Shreveport, to Southern University in Shreveport, to McNeese State University, and to Nichols State University put together. Where are our priorities? Let me mention two other areas. I said people at the top getting special treatment, getting bailouts. But I also mentioned people at the bottom. Let me talk about Medicaid. We have a law in America. And it's more than a law, it's a moral principle, it's a good one. It says that if we as Americans believe that if our neighbors are too poor to be sick, we don't let them die. Some countries do. You can't afford a doctor in some countries? Too bad. We don't do it that way. That separates us from a lot of societies, and I am very, very proud of that. But that comes with a cost, a big cost. We are spending $8.3 billion a year on our Medicaid program. We've got 1.4 million people on Medicaid. Now that's not all of them. The Medicaid program also covers folks who don't qualify for Medicaid. We pay for them through the disproportionate share program. If you add them, it's about $2 billion. And it's about 2 million people. I'm sorry, it's about 2 million people and probably even more $1 billion. But I just want to talk about Medicaid recipients. 1.4 million people on Medicaid, we spent $8.3 billion. On January 1 of 2008, when the administration took office, we had 1.2 million people on Medicaid, and we were spending $5.9 billion. That's a 41% increase. And we cannot sustain it. We can't. We're spending 40% of our budget on Medicaid. If you count the overhead, at DHH is about $9 billion. And we can't sustain it. And what does that mean? At some point, if it becomes 50% of our budget, or 60%, or 70%, the taxpayers who support that program are going to say no mas. We're not going to support it anymore. The sanctity of the program will be undermined, and that rule that we're all so proud of, that if you're too poor to be sick, it doesn't matter in America. We're not going to let you die. It is going to be undermined. What do we do about it? Last year, according to Public Affairs Research Council, we had 900,000 visits to emergency rooms for routine care. Now, what does that mean? That means that our program, perfectly legal, pays for people to take a $700 ambulance ride. Strike that. Medicaid pays for our Medicaid taxpayers pay for people to take a $700 ambulance ride to an emergency room to be treated for acne, to get a pregnancy test, to get obesity counseling, to have their eyes examined for glasses, for diaper rash, for infertility, to discuss infertility treatment. We will pay for those things under Medicaid. Perfectly legal. Some might argue otherwise, but under the law it's perfectly appropriate. But not in an emergency room. It costs 5 times more to treat a patient, to give a patient a pregnancy test in an ER than it does in a private clinic. It's killing us. And you know what we're doing about it at the Department of Health and Hospitals? Nothing. Zero. Nada. It's why our Medicaid spending, one of the reasons, is up 41% under this administration. Other states are doing something about it. Go over to Houston's Memorial Hermann Hospital. They've got what's called a patient navigator program there. They establish paraprofessionals at the entrance to every emergency room. When somebody shows up and wants to get a pregnancy test, they're told, look, we'll get you that pregnancy test. We'll get you an appointment. But you can't come here to the ER. This is for really, really, really sick people. And the law does not require it. That's another myth. The law, neither federal nor state law says that you have to treat somebody in an ER for an obvious non-emergency if they're not willing to pay for it. New Mexico put in a program in 2006 called the Nurse Advice. It's basically a call center to nurses 24 hours a day. Something like 70% of the people of New Mexico has about 2 million people are registered. You get sick in the middle of the night, or your acne flares up, or you want advice about removing a growth on your arm, or you want to talk to somebody about how to lose weight. You don't have to go to an emergency room. You just call the nurse hotline. They'll get you an appointment with a private clinic. We can save tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars by doing what other states are already doing. We're doing nothing. I'll mention one other thing under Medicaid, and then I'll talk about tax reform. I'm sorry. If you read the Medicaid annual report, I encourage you to do it. They put it out every year using your money. And I don't think anybody ever reads it, but I do. One statistic will jump out at you. 3% of all the people on Medicaid, 3% of that 1.4 million people on Medicaid spend 43% of the money. That means that 42,000 people, 42,000 people are spending 3.6 billion of the 8.3 billion that we have budgeted. That's $82,000 a person. Now, I know what you would do. Thank you. I know what you would do if you were managing the Medicaid program. You'd go find out who those 3% are. Maybe some of it's fraud. I suspect some of it is. I suspect a lot of it are people who have chronic illnesses. They have kidney disease. They have heart disease. They have diabetes. They get sick. A lot of them don't have a primary care physician. They go right to an emergency room. Other states are doing something about it. Stanford University has developed an extraordinary chronic disease management program. The state of Florida has adopted it. They're saving tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. They assign a paraprofessional, usually a nurse practitioner, to these 3% chronic users of Medicaid. And the paraprofessional, the nurse practitioner, calls them up and says, go, let me introduce myself. Here's my cell phone number. I'm going to call you in the morning. Make sure you took your medication before you go to the ER. Call me. If you need an appointment with a doctor, let me know. I'll get it for you. I'll even come get you. We're going to manage your care. They're doing the same thing at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital. They have 27 social workers on staff who do nothing but manage the chronically ill. Why are they doing it? Because under the Affordable Care Act, if you can keep people out of the hospital gets extra money. You know what we're doing? Nothing. Zero. Nada. Let me mention the last area that I want to talk about how we spend our money. And remember, the problem is, at least in my opinion, we've got too many undeserving people at the top getting bailouts and special treatment, and we've got too many undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts. And the middle class is getting the bill. So let's talk about tax reform. I'd rather talk about tax fairness. I don't know what tax reform means anymore. So let me talk about tax fairness. I used to collect taxes for the state under Mike Foster. I worked for the Department of Revenue. I was asked all the time, what's the best tax? Well, most states rely on property, sales, income, and now gambling taxes, or some combination thereof. It really is a matter of picking your poison. Every tax has advantages and disadvantages. I used to tell taxpayers, you don't want to know what the best tax is? Pick one or all four of them. But make sure that when you do it, you have as broad a base as you possibly can, so everybody pays their fair share. And if you have a broad base, you can lower the rate, so everybody pays less. We've got, if you look at the tax exemption budget, we have 462 special rules, exemptions to our tax code. About $7.7 billion. And what those rules mean, those 462 exemptions, all an exemption is, it's a rule that says somebody, or a particular industry, or a particular doesn't have to pay the same property, sales, income, excise taxes that the rest of them pay. Because taxes not only raise money, but the other purpose of a tax system is to influence behavior. You want to encourage somebody to do something? Lower the taxes on them. You want to stop somebody from doing something? Raise the taxes on them. You can influence behavior. The purpose of most of these exemptions was, when they were initially established, to create jobs. But the problem with most of them is that we haven't looked at them in ages. I mean, the last time we looked at them really to weigh the cost and benefit was never. What we need to do is go through every single one of those exemptions. Not with a political lens, but with the help of the Legislative Fiscal Office, with the help of the Legislative Auditor, and do a cost-benefit analysis. Why did we create this exemption? Is it working? Is it creating jobs? If it is, double down. Some of these exemptions, we're going to go, man, this is awesome. They're stimulating the economy. Let's give them a bigger break. But the others that aren't working, we've got to ask ourselves, is this an appropriate expenditure of taxpayer money? And the goal ought to be able to broaden your base to lower your rate. If this is done right, it's not done to raise revenue. If you broaden that base, you can lower your rate and your system as a whole will be better off, and you'll actually collect more money. We've got another week or so of the legislative session. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I've been pleased in the sense that the legislature in this session has finally decided to stop waterboarding higher education. I think they're going to fully fund it, and that's a good thing. But I will tell you, my disappointment in this legislative session has been that all you have heard is money. And let me put it another way. All you've heard is give me more of your money. Taxes, taxes, taxes. Nobody's talking about the spending side. Nobody's talking about the statutory dedications. Nobody's talking about how we can save money in Medicaid. Nobody is talking about how we can save money through our contracts. Now, it's okay to talk about the tax code. I would have preferred that we do it after the taxpayers have a little confidence in us, where we talk about making our spending a little more efficient. But the way to make tax law, tax policy, is not to see what votes you can get for a particular measure. That shouldn't be the way you make your tax policy. You ought to systematically, rationally go through each one of these exemptions one by one by one. It shouldn't be a process of throwing them all against the wall and let's see which ones stick and can get enough votes. Because mark my words, out of all these tax changes, we'll end up having to go back and redo about half of them. Maybe all of them, if a court rules that they require a 2/3 vote, which we can talk about later. That's my point of view. I don't think we have a money problem. And I don't think the money, let me amend that. I don't think we have a revenue problem. I think if you look at the numbers, it's clear we don't. What we've got is a spending problem. It is a spending problem. It's how we're spending the money that we do have. And I don't care how high you raise revenue, as long as you persist in spending more than you take in, which is what we have done each year for the past 7 years. And as long as you persist in spending it, more of it on things that you just want as opposed to things that you need, you're not going to solve this budget crisis. Thanks for having me. We've got some time, so I'll answer questions.
Just remember, working media, members of the press club, and I'll try and get the speaker to read the questions so we make sure we hear it.
Mr. Kennedy,
Yes.
everything that you discussed boils down to we could have or should have, and this administration hasn't done. At this point in time, with the new administration coming in, wouldn't this be the time for our leaders in the Senate and the House to institute a private vote that we all have in the ballot box so that people in the legislature that say the type of things that you say could actually have an impact?
Not a bad idea. We've spent an enormous amount of emotional energy and time in this session regretting yesterday. At some point, you have to stop regretting yesterday and start creating tomorrow. We've got a problem. The car's in the ditch. That's just a fact. And to me, saying, well, it'll be up to the new governor or the new treasurer or the new president of the Senate or the new legislature or the new speaker of the House, they're going to have to get us out of the ditch. That's a year from now. We need to be gassing up the tow truck this moment. We don't have a single problem that can't be fixed. But so far, there's been more rhetoric than anything else. And I understand it takes a little time. We spent 7 years getting here. Maybe it's going to take a couple of years to get us out. But I don't believe you're going to get us out just purely by raising taxes. I don't. Until you get control of your spending in your healthcare system, until you get control of your contracts, until you get control of the way you're staffing state government. We do have way too many generals. Until you get control of the way you're dedicating money and then making higher education and healthcare scrap for the last piece of meat on the bone when the other dedications over here get to happily spend every year, you're not going to solve this problem.
John, why isn't there a piece of legislation that requires us to look at all of the tax credits, all the things that are open-ended now? We look at the spending side, but we don't really look at them all cumulatively. And it seems like you add one, and then you add another one, and there have been several pieces of legislation to try and, practically look at these to see what the potential liability is. Why haven't you sponsored some legislation like that?
Well, there have been some bills. To me, the problem right now with the tax code debate is that tax exemptions is sort of a code expression for let's raise taxes. I don't think people of this state want more taxes. I think they want spending discipline. To me, the proper way to fix your tax code is to forget about raising revenue. It's to take a look at what you have, look at all 400 plus of those exemptions, and go through and do a systematic analysis of each one. Why did we create it? Is it achieving its purpose? Let me finish. Is it achieving its purpose? If it is, you double down. But I don't think that's what's going on at the Capitol. What's going on at the Capitol right now is we need money. We need to raise taxes. We're not going to worry about the spending side. That's too much trouble. So we're going to get rid of some of these exemptions, and they could be getting rid of the wrong exemptions, Beth.
But I'm just wondering about why we, as a policy matter, this is not specifically that, have open-ended, ones that have no caps at all. We don't even have that in the equation.
You make a valid point.
But why would we continue down that path? Why wouldn't we say, given the crisis that you're talking about, it shouldn't be open-ended. We should do it just for a year, or 2 years, or whatever, and then look at it.
I agree.
Okay, is this something that should be good government groups looking at and perhaps advocating?
Yes, and I think they are.
Does that mean you oppose the 11 revenue raising bills before finance day after tomorrow?
I think that there's an excellent chance they're in the Constitution. I think Article 7, Section 2 is very clear that you cannot raise an existing tax, you can't levy a new tax, and you can't change the tax exemption without a 2/3 vote. I'm not an expert, but I teach state constitutional law at LSU. And that means I've read the Constitution. And I've gone back, I'll be glad to share you a copy. I've gone back to the 1973 Constitutional Convention records and pulled the debate from the floor where they debated Article 7, Section 2. And it's clear to me that they didn't make an exception for a partial exemption. Now, I understand that the legislature is relying on an old Attorney General's opinion. An AG's opinion is just that, an opinion. I respect them. But if you read the AG's opinion, it's not really even on point.
So should they throw it out and start over again?
If
It's
they-
the basis of the...
If they want to do it right, look, this house of cards could come tumbling down. If somebody files suit and challenges this and wins, we will have to do it over. Now, it may be we'll have a new governor and a new legislature, but look, just because we're going to have a new slate of officers, this attitude that, it's going to be okay because we're going to bring in a new set of people. New is easy. Right is what's hard. I don't care who you bring in. Until you understand how you got where you are, you're not going to be able to fix it. We got where we are. It's really simple. Every year for 7 years, we have spent more money than we took in. Every year. And when we did spend money, we spent too much of it on things that politicians just wanted as opposed to things that taxpayers really needed. And we have violated that rule each year for 7 years. That's why we've got a $1.8 billion deficit. Why we have no money left in the Medicaid trust fund. Why they had to raise insurance premiums on state employees. Let me give you one example. The public-private partnerships. I've got the article right here. I looked at it again this weekend to make sure. And let me say, I support the concept of public-private partnerships for our charity hospital system. We've got some great partners. But when the administration first proposed it, go back and check it. At the time, we were spending $900 million on our charity hospital system. The administration said, if we do this, we're only going to have to spend $600 million. I said, God, that's awesome. I'll take a dozen of those. Let's saddle up and go. There's just one problem. We're spending $1.3 billion. Not $600 million, $1.3 billion. And we don't have enough money to even open the brand new $1.2 billion taxpayer-funded hospital in New Orleans. And I heard DHH in Senate committee the other day say something that to me was breathtaking. One of the senators asked a DHH official, are you saving money with with the public-private partnerships. And she said, there's no way to know. We don't have a way to do the analysis. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's just one example, Mark, in the Medicaid program. I'll give you another one. Remember Bayou Health? Still there, managed care, great in concept. We've got about 900,000 of our people on Bayou Health. We spent about $2.8 billion of your money on Bayou Health. Is it working? We don't know. You know why? Because DHH will not let the legislative auditor audit them. Darrell goes in and says, I want to audit Bayou Health to see, whether we're saving money and see quality of care. And they say, sure. Here are the numbers put together by the insurance companies. And Darrell says, no. That's not how an audit works. I get to go and look at the books myself. And DHH says, bye, you have to leave. You know what our legislature's done about it? Nothing. Nothing. How can we possibly look taxpayers in the eye and say, we're out of money, let's just talk about taxes? I'm telling you, there's money to be saved.
So you think the finance committee ought to shoot down those 11 bills?
I think if the finance committee wants to do it, what the finance committee ought to do is do it legally. And to me, it's clear it takes a 2/3 vote.
On that same premise.
And to further answer your question, I'm sorry, Sue, what I would do, and I know they're going to say they don't have enough time, and I understand that. Maybe they don't. But to me, the right way to do it is take all 470 of them and pull in that legislative auditor and pull in your excellent fiscal staff, and let's bring everybody back to Baton Rouge as long as it takes. And let's go through every single one of those exemptions, one by one. What are the costs? What are the benefits? Has it achieved its purpose? If it's achieved its purpose, not only do you leave it alone, but you may want to add to it. And if it hasn't achieved its purpose, then you have a debate. Now, I know how politically sensitive that is, but your goal ought not to be, we need to get some more cash in this place. Your goal really ought to be, let's make a tax system that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. And let's do that by broadening the base with the goal of lowering the rates.
But not to be argumentative, on this day next month, if we follow that plan, would the government have to shut down if they can't get a budget
No,
balance?
we can put together a budget to get us going a lot longer. I've seen it done before. But is that what they're going to do? No. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 9 days. But my guess is this thing is going to end up duct tape. It's going to have about $500 million of non-recurring money. And they're going to have a little present for the new administration and the new legislature going, we can't solve this problem. We created it, but we can't solve it. So, welcome to Louisiana State Government. Here it is. And that was avoidable, and it's still avoidable. Yes, sir.
On the premise of constitutionality, as a constitutional scholar, was the repeal of the income tax brackets under Skellin at the beginning of this administration, was it legal considering that people had voted to put that on themselves and it was taken apart piecemeal?
Well, changing the Constitution is a little different. To change the Constitution, as you know, you've got to get a 2/3 vote, and you put it from people, and it has to pass by a majority of those voting. A majority of those voting, theoretically, 2 people could pass a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
But when you're changing your tax code, not changing your Constitution, I think, this is my personal legal opinion, is that Article 7, Section 2 requires a 2/3 vote. Now, some may say it shouldn't, and some may say, gee, that's not right. Okay, need to go change it.
No, my question was it legal for them to take apart a constitutional amendment voted on by the people, take it apart in pieces, and basically invalidate the whole thing without sending
Was
it
it
back
legal?
to us?
Sure, it was legal.
Why?
Because our Constitution says, under the federal Constitution, it's a document of delineating powers. If you want to know what power Congress has under the U.S. Constitution, you got to go to the federal Constitution and read it and say, where are the powers? And if Congress doesn't have the power in that document, they can't do it. The Louisiana Constitution is completely different. Our Constitution gives the legislature plenary power. The rule for the Louisiana Constitution is the state legislature can do anything it wants to do unless you can point to a specific provision in the Constitution that says it can't. And that is a huge difference. The Louisiana legislature has enormously more power than the executive branch. They don't use it, but they do.
Got time for one more question.
You have, the last 7 or 8 years, enumerated this type of information to the people of the state of Louisiana. What is your solution? Would it be to have another constitutional convention that starts at 0? Would you demand that all of the candidates running for governor answer the questions you posed on this issue? Or would you have a march on Senator Lario's home in New Orleans? What is the answer that you propose?
I don't think you necessarily need a constitutional convention. You don't need a constitutional convention to review all your statutory dedications. You don't need a constitutional convention to control your costs in your Medicaid program. You don't have to invent the wheel. Just go copy what other states are doing to get control of your chronic disease management costs and your abuse of the emergency room. You don't have to have a constitutional convention to get control of your contract spending. I mean, I'll tell you how quickly we could get control of it. And businesses do this every day. Here's how you fix the contracts. This afternoon, the governor sends a memo to all his cabinet secretaries. Says, y'all come by my office today at 3 o'clock. They come by at 3 o'clock. He says, guys, gals, we got a budget problem here. We got a $1.8 billion deficit. I want to save some money. Go cut your consulting contracts by 10% and do it within the next 10 days. Now, I've been around the state government long enough to know at least one of them is going to say, Governor, I can't do that. I need these consultants. It's impossible. That's the one you fire. and the rest of them are going to do it. And if they can't do it, some of our cabinet secretaries are making $400,000 a year. I'm not, but some of them are. I bet you we can find somebody who can do it. Would it hurt? Maybe. And after you do that, after you cut them by 10%, the governor sends all the remaining consultants a letter and says, I need a 5% discount. And by the way, there is a provision in your contract that says I can get out of it with 30 days written notice. So consider this the start of 30 days in case you don't agree to the 5%. Very truly yours, Bobby Jones. You know what? They go groan, and then they go do it. Thank y'all.
Thanks, we'll send out a
We don't have a revenue problem. We've got a spending problem. We've got a $25 billion budget. 10 years ago, the budget was $16.5 billion. You know, unless you're an Alabama graduate, the direction's up. You know, you can see that. We got 50% more money today, 52% to be exact, than we had 10 years ago. Sometimes it's not how much you have, it's how you spend what you do have. And our problem with our $25 billion budget, which adjusted for population and inflation, is more money than the states have ever had since we became a state in 1812. Our problem is our spending, and more specifically, we're spending way too much money on undeserving people at the top who are getting bailouts and special treatment. And we're spending way too much money on undeserving people. Not everybody, but some undeserving people at the bottom are getting handouts. And the people in the middle get the bill. And the legislature's answer to solving all that is not to concentrate on the spending side, but to just bring in more revenue. I don't care how much new revenue they bring in and how much they raise taxes. As long as they persist in spending more than they take in, they're going to run a deficit, and that's just a fact. There are only 2 rules to budgeting. Number 1, don't spend more than you take in. Number 2, when you do spend money, spend it on things you need, not things you just want. And we've broken every one of those rules for the past 7 years. Now, we've got some bills up to help that. House Bill 30 by Representative Richard would crack down on some of the 19,000 consulting contracts that the state has. Those contracts would have to go in front of the Joint Legislative Committee on the budget and under our bill, and they could eliminate some of them and save some money. We've got another bill, House Bill 376 by Representative Lance Harris, that would require some of this federal money that we're getting, that we're spending on out-of-state consultants and on politically connected groups, that would require this grant money to be administered by our universities. I mean, we've got consulting contracts with Duke, with Texas Tech, with the University of Arkansas, with the University of Georgia. Great schools. But our schools are pretty good too. That money ought to be administered by LSU or Southern or Bossier Parish Community College or Louisiana Tech. So there's some things we can do, and I just continue to believe our problem is on the spending side, not the revenue side.
What about the Medicaid program?
Well, we're spending $8.3 billion on Medicaid. When this administration took office, we were spending $5.9 billion, 42%. And a lot of that money is wasted. We have 900,000 visits to emergency rooms that taxpayers pay for every year for non-emergencies. People taking an expensive ambulance ride to go to an ER to be treated for acne or to get a pregnancy test or to see if they need glasses. Under Medicaid, we will treat those folks for free, but not in an ER. It costs 10 times more to administer a pregnancy test in an ER than it does to a private clinic. Other states are doing something about that and saying, no, you can't go to an ER because you have a sunburn. You know what we're doing about it? Nothing. Zero. Nada. If you drill down and look at the numbers, you also find that 3% of all of our Medicaid patients spend 43% of the money. That 3% is spending an average of $82,000 a year. Something's wrong. I know what I do and you do. If you were running the Medicaid program, you find out who those 3% are and see what the problem is. You know what we're doing about it? Nothing. Zero, nada. All the DHH does is go to the legislature and say, gimme, 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 need more, need more, need more. We can save a lot of money in our Medicaid program just by copying what other states are doing. But instead, the response to our problem seems to be, we don't want to do the hard work with spending discipline. We just want you to give us, taxpayers, we just want you to give us more of your money. And I don't think that's going to solve this problem, nor do I think it's right.
What about tax reform?
Look, I believe in tax fairness. We've got 460 exemptions to our tax code. We ought to go through every single one of them. Every single one of them. And look at the cost of each exemption and the benefits. Some of them are working. Some of them are creating jobs. If they're working, shoot, double down. Double the credit if it's creating jobs. Some of them aren't working. And the ones that aren't working, we ought to talk about getting rid of them. But it needs to be a systematic, rational process. Go through each one by one by one. Not necessarily with the goal of raising taxes, with the goal of broadening your base so you can lower the tax rate for everybody. That's the right way to make tax policy. That's not what we've been doing at the Capitol. The Capitol has just been throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks, see what can get a majority vote so they can get more money in. And I understand they're under pressure, but you know what? Nobody put a gun to their heads and made them do what Bobby Jindal told them to do for the last 7 years. This took us 7 years to get to this problem. And the car's in the ditch. We can get it out, but we're not going to get it out by doing the same thing we did in the past.
If people have questions like more information about some of the issues that you've discussed here today, what should they do?
Just go to our website. We've got everything on our website, latreasury.com, latreasury.com. That's the Treasury website, and while you're there, check for unclaimed property.
Good to see you. Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I guess your response to the audit today.
Well, the legislative auditor issued a report today, and I mean, it's pretty breathtaking. You know, he took a look at the 79 tax incentive programs that the state has where taxpayers are spending money to incent certain groups to expand and grow jobs. And the different agencies, there's 6 of them that are supposed to report every year on how the money was spent and what taxpayers got in return. Of the 79 incentives, only 7 of them were reported on. I mean, there's 6 agencies responsible, only 3 agencies bothered to submit reports, and those that did submit reports only reported on 7 of the 79 incentives. And I think that's outrageous. I mean, I think that's unconscionable. I think the governor ought to fire somebody. I That means we got $1.3 billion out there of taxpayer money that's being spent through these agencies that they refuse to report on. And they're breaking the law. And somebody ought to be held accountable.
What about the fact that, I mean, obviously the whole report is to try to find out where this money is going and if it's even bringing anything back to the state. There is no word on whether this money is being spent wisely.
Well, you can't manage what you can't measure. And look, tax exemptions, tax incentives, they can work. They can work beautifully. You know, part of the tax code's purpose not only to raise revenue, but it's to influence behavior. And many of our tax exemptions and our incentives work. And they're helping businesses create jobs. And the ones that are working, we need to support. And we need to double down on them. Some of them, I suspect, aren't working. But the only way to find out is to go to the agencies that are administering the program and say, look, you guys are the experts. Give us a report. Tell us which ones are working and which aren't. And don't just give us your opinion. Give us the numbers. Well, of the 79 incentives that the legislature asked for reports on, the agencies only gave reports on 7 of the 79 incentives. There's $1.3 billion out there unaccounted for.
So what should
That's
be-
not acceptable. The governor needs to call those agencies this afternoon and say, hey, you got 24 hours to get those reports. Otherwise, you need to find yourself a new job. This just isn't acceptable.
What do you say about this all being taxpayer dollars? What do you say to those taxpayers?
I say to the taxpayers, I'm sorry. You know, as a state official, I'm embarrassed about this. I don't know why these agencies didn't do the reports.
What
But it's
about-
$1.3 billion, and people are entitled to know whether they're getting a return on the investment. And, it's up to the legislature. But if I were the legislature, I wouldn't put up with this kind of nonsense. They're down there fighting right now to fund education and fund roads and to fund health care. And you got, 3 agencies that didn't even bother to file a report, and those that did file a report only reported on 7 of the 79 incentives, and that's just not acceptable.
What about the fact that the state has a major budget deficit, yet the state's giving out $1.3 billion, not knowing if we're even getting a return on it?
Well, that $1.3 billion, maybe, I don't know, maybe well spent. Look, I'm not, tax exemptions and tax incentives can work. They can work, I'm telling you. I've seen them work, and many of ours are working. But the only way to know whether they're working or not is to look at each one, if not annually, at least every 2 years, and weigh the costs and the benefits. You can't just turn them loose and pray and hope that they work. You've got to go back and measure the value added. I honestly believe this. Many of our exemptions and exclusions are working. They're creating jobs. They're stimulating the economy. But I don't just accept that on faith. I'm a numbers guy. And the right way to do it is go through each one by one, and measure them. Costs, benefits. If they're working really well, you may want to double down. But if they're not working, you got to have a discussion about how to fix them or get rid of them.
Well, I guess what I was trying to ask is how important are these reports when we have a major
Well,
state
they're
budget?
hugely important. This is $1.3 billion of taxpayer money. I mean, it speaks for itself. This is hugely important.
Compare that to the budget deficit.
Well, the budget deficit is $1.8 billion. So there you go, right there.
Emperors, the last meeting you said that you were going to try to hold a meeting within 10 days. Have you figured
I
out?
have spoken with the chairwoman this morning. She has sent out an email. We're going to have a meeting the week of June 15th. I don't know what day that week. She's trying to coordinate everybody's schedule. As soon as she gives me the day that will be that week, I'm supposed to get a call this afternoon. I'm going to reserve us a room in the Senate. I'm going to send an email out to all the retirees and all the mayors to tell them we're going to be meeting. They're welcome to come, or they can watch us on the internet because we're going to stream it live on the internet. And we're going to take all 20 of these expenditures that have been challenged. The dinners at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and the Easter weekend trips to the Grand Hotel Resort in Point Clear. And we're going to expect staff to go through these expenses one by one and tell us how much was spent, who spent it, who it was spent on, and the reason they had to go spend retiree money to have a $3,000 meal at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. And once we get the facts, then we're going to make a decision and let the chips fall where they may. At the same time, our legislative auditor is working as hard as he can to go through them as well. It's going to take him about 8 weeks to get his report in. But I can assure you that the board, and I'm a member of the board, I'm ex officio, I don't vote, but I take this very, very, very seriously. This is not just money that, is out there, fell out of the sky. This money belongs to the taxpayers of Louisiana. It belongs to those retirees in the municipal employees retirement system. This is their money that was spent on what looks like a lot of extravagance, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
And going back to what I was asking, I guess where I'm trying to go is that how important is it to make sure to find out if the tax incentives are working? Because especially we have such a major budget.
Well,
deficit.
we've got to. I mean, we've got to find out. We're spending all in, we're spending $7.7 billion a year on exemptions. Now, let me say again, I think many of those exemptions are working, and they're achieving their purpose, and they're creating jobs. But you don't know unless you go through them, one by one by one, all 462. Every single one of them.
How important is it to show that some aren't working, though, to fix this budget deficit?
Well, it's taxpayer money that you're spending. I mean, you want to know whether taxpayers are getting a return on their investment. And the only way to do that is to get the numbers on each one and go through them one by one by one. And the ones that are working, you keep and maybe expand, and the ones that aren't working, you say, well, maybe we could spend that money better on LSU, or on fixing some roads, or on delivering some health care. Now, every one of these pools of money have constituencies, and they're going to fight hard to keep that. I understand that. But it just takes a little political courage. And the reason we're in the trouble, that we're in my opinion, it's not because we don't have enough revenue. We've got more money than we've ever had adjusted for people and inflation. It's because we're not spending it right. And the problem with our budget, that $25 billion that we have to spend, we got too many people at the top, undeserving people, getting bailouts and special treatment. And we've got too many undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts. And the rest of us in the middle get the bill. And until we get that straight and change our spending habits, then we're going to continue to lurch from budget crisis to budget crisis and live from paycheck to paycheck.
Anything else?
That's it.
Thank you.